In this section, we'll be looking at the Congo, probably the most horrific symbol of colonialism. The Kingdom of Congo had existed for over a century prior to a Portuguese expedition coming up the Congo River to find them in 1482. The kingdom itself was about 300 square miles. The Portuguese and later missionaries were impressed by the sophistication of the kingdom. There were governors for about 6 provinces that made up the kingdom. A civil service carried out the king's rule and collected taxes. They used cowrie shells as a currency and had forged copper into jewelry and iron into weapons. The people in the Congo Kingdom lived by a lunar calendar, raised yams, bananas, and vegetables, raised pigs, cattle, and goats. The leader, King Afonso I, who had been a provincial chief when the Portuguese came, converted to Christianity, and as king, he was a modernizer. He wanted the knowledge, the education that Europeans could offer, the weapons, of course, and consumer goods. He was willing to trade copper for European products that might help him buy the loyalty of neighboring power brokers. But he was selective about modernization. He didn't want to adapt Portuguese law or legal codes, and he was more interested in religion, writing, medicine, craft skills like woodworking and masonry. Instead of teaching them, the Portuguese enslaved them once the Atlantic slave trade made human trafficking more and more a valuable trade. King Afonso tried to send his grandson, nephews, and other family members to Portugal to be educated. But guess what happened? He never heard from them again. They wound up enslaved in Brazil. After King Afonso's death, the Congo Kingdom gradually divided them. Internal strife, combined with increasing European power, depleted the kingdom by the 1870s when Belgium's King Leopold II began his quest for a colony. Leopold fervently believed that overseas colonies were the key to a country's greatness, and he worked tirelessly to acquire colonial territory for Belgium. Leopold eventually began to acquire a colony as a private citizen. The Belgian government lent him money for this venture. In 1876, Leopold organized a private holding company disguised as an international scientific and philanthropic association, which he called the International Congo Society, and hired Henry Morton Stanley to explore and establish a colony in the Congo region. This was later called the Congo Free State, which is about the worst possible name considering what went on there. This territory was 76 times the size of Belgium, 3 times the size of Texas, and was the personal property of one man who never set foot there for his own financial gain. King Leopold's fortune rested on slave labor, which was enforced by a private army called the Force Publique. How was it enforced? Harshly. One of the chief natural resources of the Congo was rubber. If anyone refused to collect the rubber sap, or didn't get enough, or fell behind, they might be executed. One state official who ran a district along the Congo River was particularly dictatorial. A missionary quoted a man named Swambe, who reported, quote, "A village which refused to provide rubber would be completely swept clean. As a young man, I saw this soldier take a net, put 10 arrested natives in it, attach big stones to the net, and make it tumble into the river. Rubber causes these torments, and that's why we no longer want to hear its name spoken. Soldiers make young men kill or rape their own mothers and sisters. Those they didn't kill, they might chop off a person's hand." Baskets of severed hands became a symbol of the Congo Free State. The Force Publique, soldiers, were paid their bonuses on the basis of how many hands they collected, which incentivized the brutalism. Now, King Leopold is not going to be able to hold on to this colony forever. In fact, Leopold went to great lengths to conceal potential evidence of wrongdoing during his time as ruler of his private colony to try to prevent it being taken from him. The entire archive of the Congo Free State was burned, and he told his aide that even though the Congo would be taken from him, quote, "They have no right to know what I did there." American journalist and historian George Washington Williams made it his mission to tell the world about what was happening in the Congo, and instead of just relying on missionaries, Williams interviewed Africans about their experiences of their white conquerors. Williams is quite an interesting guy. He was born in Pennsylvania and served in the United States Colored Troops during the American Civil War, where he was wounded in combat. After fighting in the Indian Wars in the western United States, Williams bounced around as a student at Howard University and theology school in Boston, starting a newspaper in Washington, D.C., and then moving to Ohio, where he was elected as the first black member of the state legislature. In 1882 to 1883, he published one of the first black histories written by a black scholar. It was called History of the Negro Race in America from 1619 to 1880. It has a really long title, but that's the main part of it. Through a chance meeting with President Chester A. Arthur, Williams met a diplomat who was trying to convince the United States to recognize Leopold's claims in the Congo, which led to Williams going to the Congo to see how amazingly awful it was. When Williams published an open letter to King Leopold and a report upon the Congo state and country to the President of the Republic of the United States of America, people began to take notice, and soon international outrage followed. In 1908, King Leopold gave up his claim, but the nation of Belgium took over control of the colony and renamed it Belgian Congo. Now, how was King Leopold able to get away with these human rights abuses for so long? Because Europe said he could have the Congo. The British author Joseph Conrad called the scramble for Africa, quote, the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience. End quote. Otto von Bismarck, the head of the newly united Germany, called a conference in Berlin in 1884 to decide the fate of the world, or at least Africa. He invited 14 European nations and the United States to participate in cutting up the African continent. Now, why do they think they can do this? Because of racism. The Berlin Conference resulted in 4 basic rules of imperialism in Africa. First, Leopold's claims to the Congo were recognized, thanks to the United States vouching for them. Secondly, the Niger and Congo rivers were open to trading for all, and the Congo River Basin, not just the river, would be a place of free trade. And perhaps most importantly was this thing called the principle of effective occupation. This was in direct contrast to way back when, the Declaration from the Pope on the Right of Discovery. The principle of effective occupation basically said that it wasn't enough to just claim something. Nations would have to set up a government, have control over the local population either through force or through agreements, and would set to work modernizing them or exploiting them. And just take a look at sort of a before and after. 1853 map of Africa versus 1914, right up on the buildup of World War I. Whatever their nationality, European officials shared a common objective: to compel their colonies to produce raw materials for the world market in exchange for finished products from the mother country. European-run plantations and mining operations also played a major role in the colonial economy. Huge estates and mining concessions were ceded to European and American companies. The Firestone Rubber Company, might have heard of them, they make tires. They took advantage of minimal rents and no income taxes to establish the largest rubber plantation in the world in Liberia. Liberia, by the way, was established to be sort of a safe haven for enslaved people from America to go to Africa. The Belgian giant Union Minière had a virtual monopoly over the copper-rich southern Congo, while Anglo-American, a South African company, dominated diamond and gold production in southern Africa. Some of the most important natural resources that became symbols of imperialism include gold, silver, ivory, palm oil, rubber, diamonds, bauxite, that's what is used to create aluminum, iron, copper, petroleum, sugar, salt, mahogany, fisheries, cocoa, coal, and platinum. All those big, rich resources, all produced for the enrichment of European nations at the expense of the colonized. We're going to put a pin on Africa, and in the next part of the lecture, we're going to pick up with India under British rule.